Welcome back to DC Rivals. This is the series where I take the popular hero suit of Marvel Rivals and challenge myself to paint DC's iconic cast in the game's distinctive style. Last time we added Zatanna, Vixen and Hawkgirl to our ever-growing Justice League, but a hero is only as good as their villains. So this episode, we're going over to the Darkseid and painting some of DC's best and most distinct rogues. So, who are we starting with today? Well, to answer that, we're going to have to take a look at the adventures of Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, specifically issue 134, where Superman battles a gang called the New Boys Legion, orchestrated by none other than the villainous Morgan Edge, working under the orders of... Wait a minute. Who the hell is that? Darkseid is the big bad of the New Gods and the prime evil of the DC universe. Created by Jack Kirby in 1970 in this panel right here. And I swear to God, if that upcoming Jimmy Olsen show doesn't debut Darkseid on a Zoom call to some random C-list villain, then I'm writing off this whole goddamn genre. Darkseid is one of the New Gods and the maniacal ruler of the planet Apocalypse, hell-bent on universal domination. While he may possess the power to conquer countless worlds by brute force alone, his real goal is to find the fabled anti-life equation, an equation that binds all living things to Darkseid's will, inducing complete subjugation in its victims through negative emotions such as hatred, apathy, and despair. So it's pretty much your average social media algorithm. More than a supervillain, more than a god, Darkseid in his true form is the prime abstract essence of evil, existing in and above every universe, even our own. Whether it's controlling his army of parademons and minions or leading the charge into battle himself, Darkseid plays a commanding role in any skirmish, making him the perfect villainous vanguard. Now from the jump, I wanted to make Darkseid the biggest character in the cast, his sheer size dwarfing everyone else. He's got a super wide body, a tiny head, and massive fists, really leaning into his exaggerated scale, but I specifically wanted him to be taller rather than beefier. He's not the Hulk after all. I set about keeping the basic silhouette intact, but I wanted to lean heavily into the sci-fi roots of the character, so he's got this segmented body armor across his chest rather than the simple vest from the comics. I did make sure to include the skirt and the boots, and some people might think it looks a bit goofy, but I kind of like that about Darkseid. Considering what he's meant to be just as a character, I feel like you'd be missing a trick by not including his wackier elements. In case you didn't know, Darkseid is meant to be the embodiment of tyranny, a sci-fi distortion of real-world despots like Stalin, Pol Pot, Donald Trump. He's a caricature of a very specific type of evil. His creator Jack Kirby specifically based him on Adolf Hitler of all people, and considering that Jack Kirby was Jewish, you can see why that's a big deal. So as much as I like the versions of Darkseid where he's this ultra serious, mega hardcore, eldritch, death god, I think it's more appropriate when there's something slightly silly about him, because the more you learn about these historical tyrants, the more you realise that they really are just weirdos who desperately want to be taken seriously. Like all tyrants, you should be able to take a step back from Darkseid and say, this guy is just ridiculous. I mean, he is wearing a bucket on his head after all. But at the same time, that needs to be balanced with some genuine menace. Because while Darkseid does look quite silly, he can also vaporize you with a single glance thanks to his control of the Omega Force. Luckily, with a strong, authoritative pose, you can really get some of that godlike aura to shine through. Not that anything about Darkseid really shines per se, but oh well. As for colors, I wanted to be as accurate as possible, so for the most part, we're sticking with the blue and grey colour scheme, with a nice deep navy blue to lend him some regality. But I didn't want the armour to be entirely blue because I thought it would get a bit boring, and with all the added armour pieces on the torso, it can make that area visually hard to read. So you'll see a bit later, after rendering each of the armour pieces, I go about breaking them up into segments and lowering them into a darker tone. It took me a while to decide exactly which colour I wanted, because initially I was going to go for a stormy grey, but that came out a little too dull for my taste, so after some experimentation experimenting, I settled on a deep, washed-out indigo to better complement the blue. Of course, I added just a splash of red for the eyes and highlighting the Omega symbol on his chest to make the design really pop. It makes a nice contrast to the more muted blues and greys and gives it a bit more life. This was partially inspired by the New 52 Darkseid design, which had some red detailing in places, and that is the only thing I took from the New 52 Darkseid, because the rest of the costume to me just feels a bit too busy and generic. Like, come on guys, give him the skirt, you cowards. And then, in perhaps my favourite detail of the piece, I went about rendering his rocky, golem-esque skin. I started filling the skin with cracks all across his arms, legs, and heads, just kind of doodling in little segments of rock where I thought it was appropriate. It was a really cool little drawing exercise, rendering the smallest cracks around the joints with bigger segments across the broader areas of the skin, like the shoulders and the triceps. He does end up looking a bit like the Thing, but considering that Ben Grimm is another of Jack Kirby's creations, I don't think it's entirely inappropriate. Speaking of which, as a final touch, I attempted to imitate the famous Jack Kirby crackle around his fist, which is what this bubbling energy effect you see often in comics is officially called. You've probably seen it everywhere, and even if you've been reading comics for years, you might not have known that Jack Kirby is the one who invented it, so of course I had to include it in there somewhere. Now the real question remains, how would Darkseid play? Honestly, I can't really imagine Darkseid being the kind of guy who would go into all fisticuffs like someone like Superman. I imagine he's allergic to doing anything except looking imposing and sneering at people. I really like how Injustice 2 did it, where his hands are constantly behind his back, like, dude, please take this seriously. Obviously, the ultimate ability would be his Omega beams flying all over the place, taking out everyone they come into contact with. But maybe they could do something with Darkseid taking over somebody else's body, like in Final Crisis. I don't know how the hell they would do it, but I think it'd be pretty cool. And with that, Darkseid is finished. Let's take a look. I think he looks dope as hell, really living up to the dark and Darkseid, and I like how he barely just fits in the frame. I know Darkseid is pretty popular nowadays thanks to the New 52, the animated movies, and especially the Snyder Cut, so hopefully this really lives up to your expectations, and if the king is up there looking down, I just hope I made you proud, man. Anyway, enough of that, time to move on to our next villain. Have you ever felt a chill creeping up your spine? Have you ever felt an arctic wind slowly sap your life away and realize just how vulnerable you truly are? Simply know that you have never felt the true cruel grip of nature's most dangerous element until you've met this next villain. With a cold heart and a colder MO, this is no mere man, nor some petty thug, but the embodiment of winter. The one who walks in frozen nightmares, bane of those whose blood runs warm in their veins, the unforgettable. Blue Snowman. This iconic supervillain is an old foe of Wonder Woman who burst onto the scene all the way back in 1946 in Sensation Comics 59, created by Wonder Woman's original creator William Moulton Marston with artist Harry G. Peter. But there's more to this villain than meets the eye, because behind the Blue Snowman is a brilliant engineer called, well, Burner Brilliant, who turns out is actually non-binary, at least in their most recent appearance, that is. Using a power suit with ice weapons of their own design, Burner naturally put their skills to becoming a super criminal, pretending to be the Blue Snowman to hide their true identity. Of course, their battle armor has changed and evolved over the years, but their most useful asset in battle is their skill in chemistry, allowing them unlimited access to something called blue snow. And let me tell you, tried it once, not worth it. No, it's actually a type of artificial heat-resistant snow that doesn't melt, so whenever it freezes, stays frozen, making it an incredibly formidable element in the heat of battle. Burner mainly operates in the world of extortion, but sometimes whenever Wonder Woman foils their plans, Burner finds that revenge is a dish best served cold. Yeah. And by now you're probably thinking, come on Ted, ice powers in a hero shooter, are you mad? And while this may seem like a strange and and foreign concept to some, I think this has potential, which is why Blue Snowman is going to be our second vanguard of the video. Now, this DC Rivals rendition is going to be heavily based on their modern mech suit design, taken just a few steps further, while still keeping some of the elements of their original design, because honestly, I love this design. It's so quaint. I love how jowly it is. It's like if the Michelin Man became a Tory. It's something you'd expect to see in the Beano, and it harkens back to a time when superhero comics were for 12-year-old kids and not 40-year-old kids. The basic foundation of the design is spheres, like an actual snowman, but more futuristic and sleek. You've got the round head and the torso, and the circular indents down the middle of the chest like buttons, and of course I kept the fedora and the pipe. Those were non-negotiable. But everything else I decided to give a bit of a revamp to make it feel more in line with something you'd see in anime. It definitely feels more reminiscent of something like Baymax than the original design, but a bit less kawaii and more unwieldy, and a bit more rotund like in their original appearance. I also added in these little segments around the limbs like in the original Golden Age look, and the final change was adding in these sections of white paint to sell the industrial robotic appearance. In terms of scale, I wanted to make them one of the biggest characters in the game, not just to sell the whole Vanguard aspect, but so that there's enough feasible space where Burner could sit in the central chamber, while also giving the impression of a hulking figure underneath. One of my more unusual pieces of inspiration for this suit was a snowplow and other heavy machinery, which I thought was appropriate considering Burner's expertise in engineering. For one, you have all these vents in the suit to purge excess heat, and if you look closely you'll be able to see that the pipe is one of them, as well as the big funnels on the back that almost look like wings. I like to imagine that they would use those to jet themselves around the battlefield, but the biggest addition is probably the blue snow gun on their right arm. I like to imagine them using that to spray blue snow all over the ground in a continuous spray, or maybe even create ice walls with it. Considering that it's the Blue Snowman's main weapon of choice, I thought it best to directly integrate it into the Blue Snowman suit, rather than it being a separate gadget, which is how it is in the comics. It was surprisingly hard to find the right shade of blue, because blue ranges from dark to bright depending on how much green or purple you add to it. So while midnight blue naturally lends itself to darker tones, something like turquoise naturally stands out. I wanted the suit to be really clean and shiny, like a toy that's just been taken out of the box, so I chose a brighter tone to emulate that, and to lean into the colder wintertime aesthetic. But this meant I had to be very careful while rendering to not completely blow out the highlights and make them unreadable, especially when you have white as a highlight colour. You can see in the initial stages of rendering that it's this really bright, vibrant blue, and it's a beautiful colour, but for the sake of clarity, I had to bring it down a bit. Now, I'll be honest, this painting was probably the most time intensive, simply because rendering metal and machinery takes a lot of time to get right. You'd think it would be easy considering it was a bunch of spheres, and painting spheres is one of the first things you learn about light and shadow, but it wasn't that per se. It was mostly the precision involved in rendering each part of the suit, because compared to painting a person, the shapes for constructing the human body are more complicated, yes, but you have a lot more freedom in describing it. Each shape flows into the next and comes together as a whole. With something like this, however, something more mechanical, more technical, each piece has to be its own defined shape, its own object in relation to another. You can't really fudge it in the same way. You have to be deliberate at every step, and that can get quite draining when you're painting it by hand. At some point you'll see me putting down a gradient for the metal sections and simply pasting that and tweaking when appropriate. This painting was already taking too long, and if there was anything that could speed up the process, I happily did it. I'm not usually someone who likes taking shortcuts. I personally quite enjoy the process of creating artwork, even when it gets a bit tedious. But something I've been trying to do recently is to speed up my workflow, especially when it comes to art. It's not cheating to make your life a little bit easier, and honestly, why not take advantage of something unique to digital artwork, especially when the results end up being pretty much the same. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want to be full-on photo bashing. This is all still my artwork I'm messing around with, but there comes a point where my time is more valuable than the grind, especially when I have 2 more paintings to make after this. But that doesn't mean I can't put a little extra effort in polishing up this piece, so I went about quickly rendering all the grooves in the suit, all the edges and little gaps to make it feel like a machine. One last thing I did was just airbrush in a faint layer of white over the body on a new layer, set the layer to add, and it just makes those highlights stand out even more. And with that final tip, it's time to see the finished result. You know what? I'll say it. I think this design is pretty cool. Yeah. This is actually one of my favorites I've done, simply because it feels very distinct from the original design, but it's still recognizably the Blue Snowman, and it feels right at home in a game like Marvel Rivals. If there are any fans of Blue Snowman watching, do let me know how I did. I'd be interested in hearing your opinion. But for now, we must move on once again. Funnily enough, we'll be sticking with another Wonder Woman villain this time, and one of Diana's most formidable foes at that. Last episode we had Zatanna starring as our very first magic user in the series, but this villain uses magic in a very different way. Not to help the weak or to enchant the dispossessed, but to deceive, to subjugate, to sow chaos and misery and covet power above all else. For today, we're talking about none other than Circe. Introduced by George Perez and based on the enchantress from ancient Greek mythology, most famously seen in Homer's The Odyssey, Circe is the daughter of the sun god Helios, or Hyperion as he's known in DC, and the water nymph Perseus, not to be confused with Perseus, who is very different, and a bloke. She was once the princess of Colchis, who was cast out from her kingdom after killing her husband, and was stranded on the island of Aea? Yeah, that's it. While stranded on the island, she eventually made a deal with the goddess Hecate, selling her soul in exchange for immortality, eternal beauty, and magic beyond her wildest dreams. She used this newfound power to destroy her former kingdom and turn its inhabitants into bestiamorphs, human-animal hybrids she now keeps as her slaves on Aea. She also had a hand in the destruction of the ancient Amazons, putting her in direct conflict with Wonder Woman and Themyscira. Circe has fought Wonder Woman numerous times, even stealing Diana's powers at one point to become Wonder Woman herself. Circe is to Wonder Woman what Lex Luthor is to Superman, or the Joker is to Batman. So it's only right that I include her in this initial villains lineup. Now you're probably thinking, Marvel Rivals already has a witch in their roster, and I say, well, if it ain't broke, use it again. What with all the crazy magic she can conjure, Circe isn't afraid to get her hands dirty, so I think the duelist role would suit her very nicely. I'm going to be using George Perez's original design for his seminal Wonder Woman run as my basis, with some elements from the New 52 and DC Rebirth designs for good measure, all wrapped up together to create a blend of my favourite elements. I consulted her recent appearance in Creature Commandos, and while I did end up adding a helmet similar to what you see here, the rest felt too superhero-y for me, a bit too similar to Wonder Woman, so I decided to go back to Perez's design and build off of it to create something new. So to break down exactly what comes from where, the loose dress is a direct reference to Perez, as is the goblet she's holding. The dark boots and gloves with the red tips are a reference to the New 52, the chest guard is straight from Rebirth, and the belt is partially a reference to Perez, but it's mainly taken from the Bronze Age version, before Crisis on Infinite Earths rebooted the timeline and George Perez reinvented the character. I also based a lot of her design elements on traits from her patron goddess Hecate, the main motifs I use being the moon, the sun, and her three faces. Of course you have the three moons in its various stages on the belt, along with some creeping vines and twin snakes for good measure. There's the beaming bronze sun on the chest guard, as well as the crown of the helmet mimicking the sunrise with silver moons on each point in an arc, but eagle-eyed viewers may spot another detail on the sides of her helmet, where I drew these two tiny round faces that look like the man in the moon, with the wearer's own being the third. I really enjoyed pulling from ancient Greek mythology to craft this design. It honestly felt like I was designing a character for the Hades games. Actually, that's a shout. Who wants to see me make some Hades 2 fan art, huh? Yeah, could be a video if you want it. Anyway, the fiery vine pattern along her arms and legs was actually a late addition to the design, meant to be reminiscent of her look in the Rebirth Wonder Woman run, specifically when she fully absorbs Hecate's soul to become the goddess of magic. In fact, I think that would probably be her ultimate ability in Game 2, channeling Hecate's power to boost her own on the battlefield. I just really like how Hecate's powers are presented as a more primordial force, the tendrils of nature and chaos weaving into her, corrupting her, and that's mirrored by the dark underlayers of the legs and arms. The way it just melts into the skin of her arms like it's an infection rather than clothing. I will say there are a lot of design similarities to Scarlet Witch, which is funny because I never intended to take direct inspiration from her, but the pose and the headpiece are certainly quite similar, same as her footwear, so I guess it's probably inevitable from the fact that they are both witches, so it would be the same design language in some ways. But I always imagined Circe as being more regal than Wonder, and I wanted to reflect this in her design, harkening back to ancient fashion and along the lines of the Greek gods. The light billowing dress, the tiara, the thick belt and the lush hair, they're meant to communicate a superiority that Circe is desperate to embody. She definitely feels like a corrupt, arrogant princess, everything that Diana tries not to be. Though I will admit, I probably could have gone more out there with this design in some places. I mean, looking at Circe's outfits over the years, some were a lot more extravagant than others, such as the DC Universe Online design, which is, I mean, that's just a bikini. She looks cold. But I wanted something more recognisably Circe, something that culminates everything that makes the character who she is. And I think I captured that here. It makes sense when you put her next to my Wonder Woman design, which was a very traditional take on the character, also based on George Perez's work. I think if there was one thing I would change in this design, it would be the dress. I just don't think it does enough for the design. The skirt specifically doesn't really interact with the other elements in an interesting way. I'd also add in more jewellery or find ways to weave in Hecate's corrupting influence. There's just so much potential with a character like this. If I had more time to really work out the design, I could find more ways to add in these extra details. But as it stands, I do like what I've ended up with, as a foundation at least. I think it clearly communicates everything I wanted to say about the character. And in terms of painting, this was one of the easier ones to nail down. It just took a long time to fill in the details. I think by the end of it, I just needed to get it done, and what I do have, I'm really proud of. So let's waste no time and see how our Wicked Witch has turned out. Gripes aside, I am actually quite happy with this piece. I really like how cohesive it feels. By this point you can tell I was getting back into the swing of making these portraits, and hopefully this has given folks a new appreciation for Circe as a character. I mean, it certainly did for me. But now we move on to the fourth and final villain of this video, and I know some of you might be a bit disappointed by the whole Mr. Freeze fake out earlier, so this time for our last villain, let's go with someone more recognisable. Now this character will probably be familiar to those who have seen the exploits of a certain misfit superhero team on TV, but I'll give you some more clues. This particular primate originates from Gorilla City, and his most vital asset is not just his strength, but his brain. That's right, it's none other than Monsieur Mala. And the brain. Yeah, I don't know how I'm getting away with this either. This peculiar pair were created by writer Arnold Drake and artist Bruno Premiani, debuting in Doom Patrol number 86. One day, a scientist decided to steal a gorilla from Gorilla City, who he then experimented on, bestowing the ape with a genius-level intellect and calling him Monsieur Mala. Why is he French, you may ask? Really? That's the part that's tripping you up about all this? However, after a jealous colleague, one Niles Calder, aka the Chief, set off a major explosion in their lab, the scientist was grievously injured, and Mala could only salvage one remaining part of his former master, the brain. The ape placed said brain in a robotic shell, and the pair swore vengeance, forming the Brotherhood of Evil, a group hell-bent on defeating Calder and his new group of misfits, the Doom Patrol. Okay, so there was going to be a whole bit I'd planned where I'd do a cover of Pinky and the Brain, except it's Monkey and the Brain. Yes, I know gorillas aren't monkeys. Shut up. But then I realised, oh wait, that sounds like a copyright nightmare, so yeah, I'm not gonna do that. Maybe I'll put it on Patreon or something. Anyway, back to the video. Despite Mala's brute strength and their vast technological arsenal, the pair are hardly prone to mindless violence. What makes them so dangerous is their intelligence, and I think the strategist role would be the coziest fit for their unique brand of guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare. Let's just get to the painting. I began by sketching out the pair, with Mala being this great hulking beast holding a massive firearm, and the brain just perched on his shoulder, like Rocket Raccoon riding on Groot. This is going to be a pretty faithful adaptation of their look in the comics, Mala in particular, because, I mean, come on, he's already perfect. But I end up designing a new machine body for the brain, based heavily on the pill shape from his comic appearance, what with the evil face and the glass fishbowl for his brain, but I wanted to give him a bit more mobility separate from Mala. Surprisingly, I took some inspiration from Brainstorm and Ben 10, all with the crab-like appendages and claws, but I also gave him this janky-looking taser. I don't know, I just thought it would be really funny to see him scuttling around electrocuting folks while they're distracted. The brain really does come across as this conniving little pest, and it also means that Mala doesn't have to carry him around constantly. Full disclosure, this was my first time drawing a gorilla, which is funny, isn't it? Somehow, I have never drawn a gorilla before. Well, this is the first time giving it a proper attempt at least, but it's funny how comics can really expose your blind spots like that. Gorillas are funny because they mostly share the same muscle groups as humans, the main difference being scale and proportion. More specifically, the abdomen and the arms are much bigger than a human's. They might look pot-bellied to you, but no, that's all muscle. Not to mention the huge trapezius muscles that support the neck. That's all to help them get the most power out of their arms and shoulders as possible. As such, the way their body weight rests on their hips naturally tilts them forward, which means they mostly spend their time walking on all fours. But something I didn't know about gorillas until recently was that they're not just built like a brick house, they are tall. For example, a fully grown gorilla standing up on 2 legs is about as tall as me. I guess I'd only ever seen them bent over, so I never got a clear picture of their scale, but no, those f***ers are big. As if I needed any more reasons to not mess with a gorilla. They're absolutely terrifying. Now, there's another part of this painting I didn't have much expertise with, and that's the gun. Look, I'm not really a gun guy. Some people are, I'm just not. It's the same with cars, really. So trying to draw one from scratch is kind of outside my wheelhouse, because I don't know what a gun is supposed to have, what it's supposed to do other than shoot things. I just designed this generic sci-fi gun thing, put a magazine in the bottom and called it there. Same process with the bandolier and the vest. They're very simple, not much to them. I thought I might as well add them in to elaborate on Mala's army look, what with the beret and such. Honestly, people try and explain army stuff to me all the time. I just find it the most boring Is this how people feel when I explain comics? Damn. Also, I've never drawn a brain before, and now I see why, because goddamn, it's a headache. Yeah, I know, ironic. It's a whole bunch of ridges and little tendons all folded and packed together, all of their own volumes and curves. It's not exactly random, but trying to describe what that pattern is, it was kinda tough to get my head around, let's just say that. But probably the biggest undertaking of this painting, or at least the part that took the most time, was rendering Mala's fur. A silverback gorilla's fur is often very short, with some tufts around the extremities and such, but I wanted to exaggerate it slightly to make his silhouette more interesting. Plus, it just makes for a more dynamic painting. I didn't want him to just be a blob of black paint in the shape of a gorilla. You'll see I reused this metal gradient from my blue Snowman piece to speed things along. By this point, I knew I was going to have to hurry up if I wanted this video out in a reasonable time frame, so I took shortcuts where I could. Work smarter, not harder, folks. From there, it really is self-explanatory, just rendering everything out to make it look nicer, and you know the deal by now. The biggest challenge was just getting the values right for Mala's face and his fur, because for a while it does look kind of flat, so eventually I ended up adding in some silver hairs more in line with a real silverback gorilla, just to break up the black a bit. Not only that, but getting his face right was a bit tricky, especially with making the face stand out properly against his black fur. I did get that balance right eventually, but I ended up leaning more into realism than Marvel Rivals would usually allow. But so long as it looks like a gorilla's face, I think it can be forgiven. Plus, it harkens back to some of my favourite artwork of Mala, specifically this piece of this realistic ape just wearing a red beret. I think it just looks really cool. It captures the surrealism of the character really well. And with that, the dastardly duo are ready to unveil their new look. Let's see it. One of my favourite things about this series is discovering pieces of DC's history, and these two were an absolute highlight. Not just to research, but to paint as well. I love these guys, and I think they look awesome here. But enough of what I think. What do you guys think? Could you imagine these four? Well, 5 I suppose. Starring in Marvel Rivals? Comment your thoughts down below, and while you're scrolling, don't forget to like the video, and maybe subscribe if you're feeling generous. Oh, it better not be. A son of a bitch. Swear to God, this is the 5th time this week.
Aren't you forgetting someone?
Right, okay, yeah. Alright, listen, mate, you're not in the video.
Oh, come on!
No, I'm trying to be original here. I refuse to be that predictable.
But I'm the showstopper. I'm practically the star of this whole industry. Don't tell me you had the gall to include Blue Nobody and Winston over me.
They're interesting picks, they're obscure.
They're boring, that's what they are. They're what's mojo fodder.
Okay, well that's a bit harsh.
And the rest are hardly any more exciting. I've won an Oscar for crying out loud. How many Oscars has Darkseid won recently?
Well, technically Justice League won that audience award or whatever.
Oh, don't get me started on that participation trophy. There were more bots working that poll than a cyborg.
Do not finish that joke. I am trying to stay monetized here. Besides, I'm not doing it. You can't make me.
Oh, can't I? 2 words, Tedwood. Viewer retention. Every second you waste delaying the inevitable is another viewer lost to Family Guy funny moment shorts. Think of the bigger picture, Ted. Don't let the engagement farms win!
Fine.
Excellent. I took the liberty of preparing this.
Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce DC's most iconic...
A bit more enthusiasm, please?
One more word, and I'll draw you pregnant. Again.
Touché.
Once more, we interrupt your regularly scheduled program.
Yes, what video about DC villains would be complete without the Crown Prince of Crime himself, the Joker? This jailhouse jester was introduced in the very first issue of Batman released in 1940, and his design was heavily based on the titular character of Paul Lenny's 1928 silent film, The Man Who Laughs, as portrayed by actor Conrad Veidt. Although the Joker was supposed to be killed off in that same issue, the decision was overruled by editor Whitney Ellsworth, and the Joker subsequently went on to become Batman's definitive foe. I'm sure you all know plenty about the Joker already. He's one of the most famous villains, not just in comics but in all of fiction, portrayed across numerous different mediums by some of the best and most celebrated actors of their day. So I was initially hesitant to include him at all, not just because he's so prolific, but because he's been reinterpreted so many times that I had to ask myself, where do I even go with this? Do I go for a more goofy interpretation like the Silver Age Joker as seen in The Brave and the Bold? Or do I lean into a more horrific direction like David Keane's artwork for Serious House on Serious Earth? To be honest, I really struggled to come up with a unique angle, because if you were to ask me what Joker would look like in the Marvel Rivals style, this concept art by Carlos Danda for Rocksteady's Arkham Asylum would be bang on the money. I mean, let's be real, how can I improve on this? But then I took a step back and tried to look at it from a different approach. Who is the Joker in this context? What's his playstyle? What's his MO? And then, no shit, I found this. I mean, there it is. It's perfect. I don't know what else we want from me. Video's over, folks. Well, okay, not exactly this, but it did give me an avenue to explore. My Joker isn't going to be just some regular old gangster or some frightening hell demon bent on destruction. He's the world's most theatrical troll. He's an annoying little shit that you just want to grind into the dirt every time you see his shit-eating grin, even at the cost of all strategy or cohesion. In the grand tapestry of this Rivals cast I'm building up, Joker is not a heavy hitter. He's a nuisance wrapped up in pageantry, and as such, he's going to be our second strategist. The first step, as always, is to sketch out the pose, standing nice and tall with one hand flung out to the side in a big theatrical pose, like he's opening up the whole damn show. The foundation for my design is, of course, Arkham Asylum, because like I said, it's honestly perfect, but my challenge was to build on that and give it a unique spin. My first thought was to go all in on the circus theme, because the average game of Marvel Rivals is damn close to a circus already. It's chaos even at the best of times, and the Joker loves nothing more than chaos. So I decided to tweak his design to be more reminiscent of a ringleader, kind of like Jerome's ringleader outfit in Gotham, if you guys remember that. Low-key one of the best Joker performances, especially in live action. I mainly tried to achieve this by mimicking the high waistline with the trousers and the waistcoat, adding in some gold patterning around around the edges of the jacket, and I also pulled the same trick as I did with Satana by curling his coattails into these exaggerated shapes, although these ones are slightly more jagged to better fit Joker's character. I really enjoy when artists give the Joker more clownish details that veer from his regular look, which sounds strange because obviously he is a clown already, but if you really want to be particular, the Joker is more clown adjacent than actual clown, because his main inspiration, the man who laughs, wasn't actually a clown. His horrific smile was the product of a deformity, meant to lend an air of tragedy to the character, like the titular Phantom of the Opera. And while Joker is obviously themed after the Joker playing card, the actual imagery of a decked Joker is more reminiscent of a harlequin or a jester than the modern clown. It's actually something I appreciate about the 2019 version in their use of real clown makeup, because it makes that version of Joker more distinct, and I especially like the blue eye makeup. Something about that really works for me, and you'll see I included it in this painting. I also made sure to include some of Joker's classic equipment, the main ones being his hand buzzer and the acid spraying flower on his lapel, but a late addition was the elongated revolver, in a partial reference to the 1989 movie. It may not be clear until later, but I also gave him a pocket watch counting down to detonation, just to hammer home his old-timey aesthetic even more. Aside from that, the only things I can really say are mine are the green ankle protectors on the shoes, and maybe the dark patches on the shoulders, because everything else is spot on. A very traditional look for the character, because to be honest, we've seen non-traditional looks for the character, and no, not that one. Oh no, get it away from me. I deliberated on how ugly to make him, which might sound funny, but if you think about it, there aren't that many ugly characters and rivals. And don't say Venom or the Thing, because 1, rude, and 2, they're not really meant to be human faces in the same way as the other characters. So long as they're meant to be fully human, they're usually these picture-perfect, gorgeous anime people, and the Joker is... let's just say he's not that. So I was a bit on my own really in designing him, because God forbid I'm making the Joker hot. They tried that in Suicide Squad and it was awful, and I never want to hear about it again. I am not appealing to whatever sick individuals think that this guy and you know what, while we're here, anyone in the comments who says my Joker looks like Junkrat is getting named and shamed. I don't want to hear it. Overwatch is gone now. It can't hurt me anymore. And while the rendering gets fully underway, let's talk about how this Joker would play, because at first the obvious thought was making him a duelist, because if there's one thing the Joker excels at, it's dealing out damage, both physical and psychological. But the more I thought about it, the more I realised it would be infinitely funnier if he were a strategist. I want to cultivate a playstyle that encourages players to be as sneaky and intrusive as possible, a bit like those Arkham Asylum stealth missions that were only on the PlayStation 3. I'd love to encourage players to put down traps, hide behind cover, and come out and hit someone square in the head with the massive revolver. And to those wondering how he might heal people, maybe he could, I don't know, shoot syringes that heal his friends and slowly damage his enemies. Talk about big hammer right there. Big hammer. Come on, people, these are the jokes. The finishing touches are mostly just readjusting the tones to make the suit properly shine. If there's one thing you can say about the Joker, it's that he's flashy. Some would say gaudy, and I'd say yes. Definitely gaudy, tacky, whatever you pick. He would wear Supreme if he could. Is Supreme still a thing? I don't know, man. I'm 25. I have work and shit. And the last little things are giving his suit the pinstripes, just lining over the top in a multiply layer, and adjusting the pose to be a bit more exaggerated. With that, that's about it. Alright, let's see the showstopper himself. You know how they say save the best till last? Well, arguably, I think I have. This is a brilliant painting. It just screams Joker, but I also think it kind of feels new and fresh at the same time. It definitely feels like he's stepped right out of a video game, you know what I mean? Comment down below what you think of my attempt at depicting the Clown Prince of Crime, and at the same time, could you imagine these dastardly themes starring in Marvel Rivals? Don't be afraid to tell me what you think, and while you're scrolling, don't forget to like the video and maybe subscribe if you want to see more. If you want to support the channel directly, then head over to my Patreon. For just £2 per month, you get to see all of my videos a day early, as well as get sneak peeks on what I'm working on next, including a big announcement about the future of the channel. Don't worry, it's all good news, but just to make sure, why don't you click the link and check it out for yourself. As for what's next, well, November has historically been a Zelda month on YouTube, so it's about time I finally get back to that series, but after that, don't worry, DC Rivals is going nowhere. You'll see plenty more of that soon. Although, looking at our current lineup, I could swear we're missing something.
Oh, hello, Jeff.
Oh, come here. Aren't you just the cutest, most marketable little... Wait a minute. That's who we're missing, a cute mascot character. Folks, the hunt is on. You know what to do. Comment below which DC character deserves to be our Jeff. In the meantime, I think it's best I take this guy out for a walk. He's been stuck inside for months at this point. Yeah! See you next time, folks.